Sensual music all neglect monuments of an aging intellect. An aged man is but a paltry thing, a tattered coat upon a stick, unless soul clap its hands and sing, and louder sing for every tatter in its mortal dress. I've borrowed these poetic words from the Irish poet William Butler Yeats to allow me to ask a question. Is ours no country for old men? Are they and we and Mukwena wa Mudimusana, who sleeps in this wooden home in front of us, but paltry things, tattered coats upon a stick? Do we permit that the young in one another's arms all neglect monuments of an aging intellect? Before us lies an outstanding patriot who will always be remembered in terms of the high honor accorded to him by a very grateful nation, as an esteemed member of the Order of the Baobab. That would not have been if, as the poet said, we had chosen to neglect this great monument of an aging intellect, Dr Sam Motsuenyane. Towards the very end of the magnificent telling of the story of his life in the book, A Testament of Hope, Dr. Motsuenyane says that we must learn from other nations like the Chinese and the Japanese, that have acquired a lot of the Western way of life, but have done so without negating their cultural essence. And he cited the Chinese and the Japanese because they stand out for the progress they have made at different times to reach the high economic standing they enjoy today in the context of the global economy. And true to the mission he had pursued over a lifetime, he was expressing the hope that through their own efforts, his own people would register the economic success achieved by others, such as the Chinese and the Japanese. What remained unstated in expressing that hope was the damnation of the oppressor, who had stifled the extraordinary native talent which indigenous Africans had demonstrated, even as the colonial wars to rob them of their independence and sovereignty were still raging. And here is a glimpse of the success of indigenous African farmers and business people in the 19th century, as reported by Dr. Colin Bundy. And he wrote that in 1864 at an agricultural show, it had been universally remarked that the native exhibition far excelled that of the Europeans, both the number of them and the quality of the articles exhibited. And then Mr. Blow in 1870 found the progress of the natives remarkable, he said, taking everything into consideration, the native district of Pedi surpasses the European district of Albany in its productive powers. In Ngamakwe in May 1880, prizes at the show were awarded for wheat. This is all crops grown by the African farmers. Prizes at the show were awarded for wheat, barley, oats, potatoes, forage, maize, millet, tobacco, cabbages, turnips, beetroot, wool, bread, butter, dried fruit, ham, bacon, and handicrafts. And comparing them with Europeans, insisted Mr. Hemming of Queenstown, taking man for man and acre for acre, the native produces more from a smaller extent of ground and with more primitive appliances than the Europeans. And here is the story of an African entrepreneur of the day. Undeterred by his father's opposition, he went to King Williamstown and served as a conscript in the 1877 war. And he says, while ostensibly sending home my month's earning to my father, in the usual native custom, I cunningly opened a private bank account into which I diverted a portion of my wages until I had saved 80 pounds. With this, I bought a span of oxen with yokes, gear, plow, and the rest of the agricultural paraphernalia, and staked my life on farming. And within 5 years, he had made good. And he said he had bought a wagon, And with a short time and accumulated £1,000, I had now purchased a small farm and various plots of land at what was considered high prices in those days. And he urged his listeners to do likewise and to adopt what he said were modern methods of profit making. This is 150 years ago by an African farmer. As all of us know, this exciting story of this kind of entrepreneurship, which Dr. Motsuenyane did everything to encourage, was deliberately killed. The confiscation of the Ngqika locations after the 1877 war was a turning point, after which overcrowding, land disputes, a young landless group, indebtedness, and a large wage-seeking group are perennial motifs. And in addition to land expropriation, African peasant prosperity was mentioned by the countervailing class interests of the white settler communities. The Transkei as a whole reports after 1900 saw the dependence of the territory on American maize, the desiccation and erosion of the land, indebtedness, and the mounting flow of migrant laborers. And the syndrome of deterioration, once in progress, was self-perpetuating. And the Cape Attorney General at the time, Richard Rosenis, had outlined his plan for creating a concentrated peasant population near the industrial centers, explaining, and he said, "I would not make the ground sufficiently big to enable a man to become a farmer and to live on the soil or out of the plot. But I would allow him an opportunity of cultivating a small plot where he could leave his wife and children while he was laboring for a wage." And in 1893, the magistrates in Tsomo in the Transkei summed up the situation that emerged as follows. Their headmen and others who 15 years ago had fine square houses, fine enclosed gardens with fruit trees, today you will find the men living in huts, the garden walls have fallen down, and the trees eaten down by the goats. Fingerland has gone back tremendously in the last 4 or 5 years. It is not in the progressive state in which it was 15 or 20 years ago. In 1919, the 1919 Constitution of the ANC said that the January 8, 1912 meeting resolved that it was expedient and desirable that a well-digested and accepted native opinion should be ascertainable by the government and other constituted authorities with respect to the native problem in all its various phases and ramifications. And the native problem in all its various phases and ramifications included the economic deprivation of the African masses that we've just spoken of. However, the reality is that necessarily the ANC focused more on the political relating to the matter of the exercise of political power in our country, and therefore the political emancipation of the black oppressed. And nevertheless, the economic challenges were by no means forgotten. The important 1943 document, the Africans' Claims, included among its Bill of Rights the right to engage in all forms of lawful occupations, trades, and professions on the same terms and conditions as members of other sections of the population. It also said, we protest very strongly against all practices that impede the obtaining of trading licenses by Africans in urban and rural areas, and we equally condemn the confinement of African economic enterprises to segregated areas and localities. And for its part, among others, the 1955 Freedom Charter said that all people shall have equal rights to trade where they choose, to manufacture and to enter all trades, crafts, and professions. And despite the setting of these goals as part of the process of the liberation of the black oppressed, no truly national organization emerged specifically to pursue them until 1964, when NACOC, which became NAFCOC, was formed. In addition to setting such objectives as to further development of black business community by sponsoring needed industrial, commercial, and agricultural projects and so on, in its 2011 constitution, NAFCOC said that it stands for the eradication of obstructive, arbitrary, discriminatory, bureaucratic, and unjust laws and constraints, and the creation of a free, non-racial, positive economic development and growth through advocating of an enabling environment for its members, and together with the developmental state, advance real economic transformation. Unquote. It was coincidental that the giant step forward marked by the establishment of NAFCOC in May 1964 was followed a month later in June by the major setback of the sentencing to life imprisonment of 8 of the accused at the Rivonia trial. This signified that although the country was experiencing extreme repression, as exemplified by the Rivonia and the other arrests, there were brave patriots among the black oppressed who decided to fill the void which had been caused by the absence of an organized formation to address the economic rights of the oppressed. Our country is blessed that Sam Motsuenyane was a member of the very first executive committee of NAFCOC, and later continued in this leadership echelon as president of the Federated Chamber for 24 years from 1968. The period in our country when NAFCOC was established was very challenging, especially for those who led movements and initiatives seeking genuine change. It required leadership of high caliber to contend with the brutal and cunning offensive in which the apartheid regime was involved for purposes of self-protection. It required a leadership which was clear and consistent about the principal objective to be achieved, ensuring that it was properly understood by the members and supporters. Sam Motsuenyane was such a leader. It required a leadership which could elaborate the strategy and tactics required to reach the end goal, to respond to the changing situation, including the enemy maneuvers, without deviating from the principal objective, and ensuring that the members and supporters responded correctly to such dynamic strategy and tactics. Sam Motsuenyane was such a leader. It required a courageous, ethical, and committed leadership, capable of standing for the truth at all times and the defense of what is right, stubborn and tireless in the pursuit of the agreed objectives, inspiring members and supporters, whatever circumstances, to believe and understand that acting together, they would overcome. Sam Motsuenyane was such a leader. It required a leadership which knew the necessity for this and was willing to make the required sacrifices for the achievement of the common goals, seeking neither public acclaim nor material benefit, with its actions, not words, inspiring the absolutely necessary trust and confidence in their leadership by the members and followers. Sam Motsuenyane was such a leader. He told the truth and gave important guidance when he said in his testament of hope that the work that my colleagues and I did for NAFCOC during the 24 years of my presidency was not for personal gain. It was for the most part a personal sacrifice and was not done to generate wealth for any individual member. We built NAFCOC primarily on sacrifice, and it is important that our children do not forget where we come from. They must not think that because we now have more to share, there is much less sacrifice required to promote our nation's development. A principled man of courage, Dr. Motsuenyane did not hesitate to lead the NAFCOC delegation which visited the ANC in Lusaka in 1986. After the 1985 21st Annual NAFCOC Conference, it directed that this must happen. The president of NAFCOC gave a report of this visit to Lusaka at the 1986 22nd Annual NAFCOC Conference held at the Good Hope Center in Cape Town. And here is what he wrote in this regard. As the press had widely publicized the message that NAFCOC was going to discuss a report on its discussions with the ANC, the huge conference hall at the Good Hope Center was packed to capacity, filled not only by our members, but also by guests from far and near. At the end of my annual presidential address, which took 2 hours to present, I almost broke down as the delegates spontaneously rose to their feet to give me a standing ovation. The atmosphere was charged with excitement and anxiety as to what NAFCOC should do next. I have no doubt that our compatriots gathered that day at the Good Hope Center responded with a standing ovation after NAFCOC President Sam Motsuenyane's report, because they understood that an historic event of great importance had taken place. As the two delegations met in Lusaka, led respectively by Oliver Reginald Tambo and Sam Motsuenyane, two historic fronts of struggle joined hands. One formed in Bloemfontein in 1912, and the other in Orlando 82 years later in 1964. The delegates and visitors at the Good Hope Center were right to celebrate Dr. Motsuenyane's report, because the very fact of the meeting in Lusaka communicated a message that something new was in the offing. President Motsuenyane himself has written that the 22nd Annual NAFCOC Conference took a resolution to continue its relationship and discussions with the ANC, and he said from that time on, the two organizations grew much closer. And this closeness was illustrated dramatically in 1989, when NAFCOC responded to an ANC request and dispatched almost 400 minibus taxis to Namibia to support SWAPO as it contested that country's very first democratic elections. Ntademokhulu's departure has taken away from all of us a true gentleman, whose dignified bearing and self-effacing manner and gentle humor confirmed that in him were the true humanists. In him we had a monument of unaging intellect, who will continue to serve as our beacon and guide as we attend to his unfinished work of the fundamental transformation of our country. And how I wish he was still with us to lead us in the new national dialogue we have proposed. Dear Mama Jocelyn and the rest of the Motsuenyane and Mashinini families, please accept Zanele's and my heartfelt condolences, as well as those of the Mbeki Foundation, at the loss of one so dear to you, Ntademokhulu Sam Motsuenyane. Robala Kakake Somkwena wa Modimo Sana, esteemed member of the Order of the Baobab, iconic hero for our people, monument of an aging intellect, our beloved leader, Dr. Sam Motsuenyane. Truly, your spirit lives on. And I thank you very much.